The shooting of an Indiana judge and his wife in broad daylight is one of those events that initially registers as shocking on a purely human level, but upon closer inspection reveals deeper fault lines within contemporary American society. Judge Steven Meyer, a long-serving member of the Tippecanoe Superior Court, and his wife Kimberly Meyer were shot inside their home in Lafayette, Indiana during daylight hours. Both survived, suffering non-fatal gunshot wounds, yet the physical injuries tell only a fraction of the story. What truly unsettles the public, law enforcement, and the legal community is not simply that a violent crime occurred, but that it targeted a sitting judge in a space traditionally understood as private and secure. This incident disrupts long-standing assumptions about the separation between public authority and private safety, raising urgent questions about institutional vulnerability, political polarization, and the erosion of social restraint. At first glance, it might be tempting to interpret the shooting as an isolated act of violence, tragic but ultimately random. After all, the United States experiences a high volume of gun-related crimes each year, and many occur in residential settings. Yet context matters. Judges are not ordinary victims in the symbolic sense. They represent the authority of the state exercised through law rather than force, through procedure rather than passion. An attack on a judge's home carries a meaning that extends beyond the individuals harmed. It suggests a willingness, whether intentional or incidental, to violate a boundary that underpins the rule of law. The idea that legal decision makers can perform their duties without fear of personal retaliation. When that boundary is breached, even once, it sends a signal that resonates far beyond the immediate crime scene. One of the most troubling aspects of this case is the lack of clarity surrounding motive. As of the latest reporting, law enforcement has not publicly identified a suspect nor confirmed whether the attack was targeted specifically because of Judge Meyer's judicial role. This uncertainty is itself destabilizing. In the absence of a clear narrative, speculation fills the void. Was this a personal dispute unrelated to the judge's professional life? Was it an act of revenge by a disgruntled litigant? Could it be ideologically motivated, tied to broader political or cultural grievances? Or was it simply a random act of violence that happened to strike a prominent public figure? Each possibility carries different implications, yet all share a common consequence. They erode confidence in the predictability and safety of civic life. The multi-agency response to the shooting underscores how seriously authorities are treating the incident. Local police were quickly joined by county sheriff's deputies, Indiana State Police, prosecutors, and the FBI. This level of coordination is not routine for standard criminal investigations. It reflects an understanding that violence against a judge potentially constitutes a threat not just to individuals, but to institutional integrity. Federal involvement, in particular, suggests investigators are considering whether the attack could fall under statutes related to threats against public officials or interference with the judicial process. Even if the crime ultimately turns out to be personal rather than political, the fact that such possibilities must be considered highlights how fragile the boundary between personal grievance and institutional attack has become. To understand why this event feels especially unsettling, it is important to situate it within the broader climate surrounding the judiciary in the United States. Over the past decade, courts at all levels have increasingly found themselves at the center of political and cultural conflict. High-profile rulings on abortion, voting rights, gun laws, immigration, pandemic restrictions, and criminal justice reform have transformed judges from relatively obscure arbiters into visible actors in the national conversation. Media coverage often frames judicial decisions as wins or losses for particular ideological camps rather than as interpretations of law. This framing can subtly but powerfully reshape public perception, encouraging people to view judges not as neutral officials but as political adversaries or allies. In such an environment, the risk of personalization grows. When legal outcomes are perceived as existential threats to identity, values, or livelihood, frustration can metastasize into anger. While the vast majority of citizens express that anger through lawful means such as protest, advocacy, or voting, a small minority may be tempted to cross the line into intimidation or violence. The judicial system depends on the assumption that this line will largely hold. When it does not, even in a single high-profile case, the psychological impact on judges and court staff can be profound. The immediate response from Indiana's judicial leadership urging vigilance and caution reflects this reality. It is a tacit acknowledgement that the perceived risk landscape has changed. Another dimension worth exploring is the spatial symbolism of the attack. This shooting did not occur in a courthouse, a public building, or during official proceedings. It happened in a private home, during the day. That detail matters. Courthouses already operate with heightened security, metal detectors, armed deputies, controlled access points. Judges accept these measures as part of their professional environment. Their homes, however, are supposed to be spaces of normalcy, where the weight of office recedes and personal life takes precedence. An attack in that setting collapses the distinction between public duty and private existence. It implies that there may be no clear refuge, no off-duty space immune from the consequences of public service. The involvement of Judge Meyer's wife as a victim further intensifies the emotional and ethical stakes. Violence that spills over onto family members evokes a particularly strong reaction because it violates widely held norms about proportionality and innocence. Even in societies accustomed to high levels of violence, there is often an implicit understanding that disputes, however bitter, should not involve spouses or children. When that boundary is crossed, intentionally or not, it deepens the sense of moral rupture. Kimberly Meyer's public expressions of gratitude and confidence in law enforcement demonstrate resilience, yet they also highlight how ordinary citizens can be thrust into extraordinary circumstances simply because of their proximity to power. From a policy perspective, this incident raises difficult questions about how far security measures for judges should extend. Providing personal protection to all judges at all times is neither practical nor consistent with democratic norms. Excessive security risks isolating judges from the communities they serve, reinforcing perceptions of elitism or detachment, yet insufficient protection leaves them vulnerable. Striking the right balance requires not only resources, but also an honest reckoning with the social conditions that give rise to threats in the first place. Security measures can mitigate risk, but they cannot address the underlying causes of hostility toward institutions. Media coverage plays a critical role in shaping public understanding of this event. Headlines emphasizing broad daylight and massive multi-agency investigation are factually accurate, yet they also heighten drama and urgency. This is not inherently irresponsible, but it carries consequences. Sensational framing can amplify fear, encourage copycat behavior, or deepen cynicism. At the same time, underreporting or minimizing the incident would fail to acknowledge its seriousness. The challenge for journalists is to contextualize the event without inflaming it, to inform without provoking. In an era where social media fragments attention and rewards outrage, meeting that challenge is increasingly difficult. The broader social implications extend beyond the judiciary. Violence against public officials, whether judges, legislators, or administrators, signals a breakdown in the norms that allow pluralistic societies to function. Democracies depend not only on laws and institutions, but on shared expectations about behavior. Disagreements are inevitable. Coercion is not supposed to be. When violence enters the equation, it shifts disputes from the realm of persuasion to the realm of force. Even isolated incidents can have an outsized impact because they demonstrate that the taboo against attacking civic authority is no longer absolute. It is also important to resist simplistic narratives. Not every act of violence against a public figure is politically motivated, and assuming so prematurely can distort understanding and inflame tensions. Law enforcement's careful, methodical approach to this investigation reflects an awareness of that risk. At the same time, dismissing the institutional significance of such an attack would be equally misguided. The truth likely lies somewhere between these extremes, shaped by specific circumstances that investigators have yet to fully uncover. What matters in the interim is acknowledging uncertainty without allowing it to paralyze public discourse. Ultimately, the shooting of Judge Steven Meyer and his wife serves as a sobering reminder of how fragile the boundary between stability and disorder can be. It exposes the human cost of public service and the pressures faced by those tasked with upholding the law in contentious times. Whether the motive turns out to be personal, random, or ideological, the incident compels a broader reflection on how societies protect their institutions not just through force, but through norms of respect, restraint, and accountability. The true measure of the response will not be found solely in the arrest of a suspect, but in the collective willingness to reaffirm those norms in the face of fear and uncertainty.